Marcie Lynn Tentchoff, and this is my poem, Midnight. There's no lock on the door since the midnight men came, with their pale, grinning faces, their tire-track eyes, and the sound of the shadows seems louder somehow on the street that runs empty past Emily's house. She still plays there sometimes on the gray concrete stoop, with the screen door wide open to welcome the rays that spread out from the dish on the middle school roof. Education for all's what the midnight men stay. And the grown-ups all smile as they murmur along with the lessons they learn in the new, better way, while they work at new jobs that the midnight men brought, till their finger bones show white on red like their teeth. It's much safer these days. No one worries at all about vandals or thievery. Those things are done. And if every gaze shies from the old Northgate Mall, no one says much about it, or questions the smell. But young Emily wishes her life would change back to the way that it was before fog drifted down from the cracks in the sky where tomorrow peeked through, before midnight came early and never moved on. If you're asking why I write poetry specifically, I tend to write short. I like to write large concepts in small packages. I write flash fiction, but I love writing poetry because that's really condensing it down. Also, there's a theatrical element of poetry. It's meant to be spoken, to be heard. And I also love theater, so it really combines the two. And since I write as much poetry as I do, I've started to think in meter as much as anything else, so it's almost hard not to think in poetry. Well, on the first level, Midnight is definitely a poem about a small town that has been invaded by something evil, and it's seen through the eyes of a child seemingly too young to be able to do anything about what she's seeing. Really, I see Midnight as a poem about free will. Children, while they have certain freedoms, don't have full free will because they are dependent upon adults for everything. They're told what to do by adults. Their bedtimes are limited. Their allowance is limited. And in this case, it's the adults who are losing their free will and the children who are seeing it and still able to think for themselves. I often start out with an image in my mind or some line that pops into my mind based on something I've read or seen. And then the poetry flows quite easily for me generally. I'll just start writing lines and see where they get me. Sometimes I'll start with the final line, and when I'm finished, it doesn't end up being in the poem at all. But one way or another, the poem just flows. There is some revision, always. You go back and change things, or you come upon a line that doesn't work right, and you have to keep working on it over and over again. But generally, poetry writes itself. Then I send it off to my critique group. They look at it, they tear it apart, I rewrite it, and then I try to sell it. Remember that there's musicality in a poem that there isn't always in prose writing. There are so many tools that a poet can use, from rhyme, meter, alliteration, that help keep a poem in the person's head. Readers will hear it in their mind, and that keeps it in their memory forever, and that makes it stronger. While you're in the middle of a situation, you can think back to a line of a poem. It just will show up there because it's apt, it seems right. And if you use those tools well, the rhyme, the meter, you can do a lot with a little. You can say a lot in a small, small space. Poetry is just one form of communication. It is communication between the poet and the reader. Because of that, don't assume that the poet is trying to trick you. Don't assume that this is going to be too hard for you. Take what the poet has written literally. The poet wants to communicate an idea, a feeling, an image, a concept. And if he's not doing it, he's a bad poet. Therefore, let yourself enjoy the poem. Let yourself read it and believe that you're understanding it. Sure, poets like to play with words. After you've read it the first few times, go back, look at between the lines, look for wordplay. But really, whatever way you experience the poem is valid for you as a reader. And then do remember to try to read it out loud, because poetry has its own music that you want to hear as well as read. I can go back to Alfred Noyes, the old story poems. I like poems that tell a story. I love David Kopaska Merkel's work. I think his poems are wonderful. It would be easier to give you a list of poets I don't like than give you a list of poets I do like. Canada is so different. The different sides of Canada, the East Coast and the West Coast, are completely different from the middle of Canada. I live on the West Coast. We love our salmon. We love food trucks full of all kinds of food. I think you'd find something wonderful everywhere you go in Canada. The East Coast is wonderful too. The seafood is wonderful. The people are wonderful. The music is wonderful. Well, I probably should say that Midnight brought up a bunch of questions that I know I never answered in the poem. And it stuck with me for years afterwards, so that I ended up just finishing a collection of poetry based on Midnight, set in the same town and told from the points of view of all the children in the town. And that will be coming out from Hiraeth Publishing very, very soon.